Okay, viewers, so this is the Sober Living series that I have promised. I want to start it off with an article from this particular book, Understanding Addiction, what we know, what we're learning. The Sober Living series in general is going to be everything from learning about living sober after addiction. And we'll go over things like emotions felt during recovery, like guilt, anger, frustration, boredom, compulsivity, and how boredom and compulsivity tie in together, relationships during recovery. I'll also go over programs, recovery programs like AA, NA, Smart Recovery, Matrix, MAT, and the medications that fall under MAT, which is medication-assisted therapy, such as Vivitrol, Methadone, Suboxone, Ketamine, Kratom, and more. But I would like to start with this particular article. It's called Beyond the 12 Steps. And I wanted to start with this one in particular because this article goes on the fact that AA is not the only meeting out there. It's not the only program out there that you can go to that will help you with recovery. So, the Alcoholics Anonymous model has worked for drinkers and drug addicts for decades, but there are other options. So William Nelson, an MD, a naturopathic medical doctor, in Scottsdale, Arizona, never intended to get involved in addiction medicine. But then his stepdaughter, Lauren, became hopelessly dependent on heroin. She overdosed multiple times. Her heart stopped twice. They had to use the paddles on her. As the 20-something cycled in and out of rehab and the ER, Dr. Nelson lived in fear of the inevitable tragedy. But one day, he stumbled upon a drug called naltrexone. It's an old FDA-approved medication that treats opioid addiction, and this is what Suboxone does too, by blocking the opioid receptors that are in your brain, which makes it impossible. So if you're taking naltrexone, Suboxone, it literally makes it physically impossible for you to get high off of an opioid if you take it while on it, because the receptors that receive those opiate, signals are blocked by the Suboxone or naltrexone. After Lauren received naltrexone implants, which slowly infused the drug into the system, she was able to remain sober for the first time. So, in my case, if it wasn't for Suboxone, I would not be sober. I couldn't get sober on my own, cold turkeying it, detox, that just didn't work for me. I relapsed every time and would just spiral down from that point. So, Lauren's story could have had a far different ending. Every day, 250 plus people in the U.S. die from opioids, including heroin and prescription painkillers such as OxyContin, fentanyl, and Vicodin. Unintentional overdose deaths from these drugs have shot up almost 500% since 1999, guys. That's 500% from the year 1999 to now. The odds are not good for a quick recovery from addiction. 85 to 90% of people who kick opioids start using again, officially known as the recidivism rate. Those of you who don't know what that word is, recidivists, it is a repeat offender, literally. I, at the time, before I finally stuck with sobriety, was a recidivist because I would continue to go back to drugs over and over and over, and it was just my automatic go-to for whenever things got hard. So that could be anything. A recidivist is a repeat offender. Within 1 year. So again, that's 85 to 90% of people who kick opioids start using again or relapse within the year. Relapse is now considered to be part of recovery, which can take many years. I'm in my 7th year of sobriety. Drinking problems, meanwhile, affect nearly 15 million Americans, according to the 2018 National Survey on Drug Use and Health, and can be extremely difficult to overcome. I personally, and according to doctors who have treated me as well, heroin use, alcohol use, and Suboxone use are some of the hardest things to withdraw from. I have had a hard time with Suboxone. If I don't take it, I get sick right away. Which is what we're working to prevent. I started at 16 milligrams a day. The most you can do is 32. 3 strips a day. I was doing 2 strips a day. 1 in the evening, 1 in the morning. And I went from 16 milligrams down to 3 now, which is a huge improvement. And I've been doing it for 7 years, almost 8 now. So, only studies show that it's not a quick fix. Only 1/3 of those who get help for a drinking problem are free of alcohol 1 year later. But there is some encouraging news on the recovery front. Old meds are being given a second look and used in new ways to curb cravings for drugs and alcohol. Programs are springing up that emphasize holistic approaches to recovery, including cognitive behavior therapy, which we'll go over as well, retraining the brain to build healthier neural pathways instead of just relying on a chemical to make you happy. The biggest change of all, though, is a rethinking of what recovery even means, which is why I like the Matrix program, because it teaches you that and doesn't base its entirety on you need to surrender to your higher power. There is a paradigm shift going on in our field, says Vonnie Nealon, Clinical Director of Warrior's Heart, an inpatient substance abuse treatment program for military vets and first responders in San Antonio, Texas. We're realizing that there may be some people with a substance abuse problem who are able to recover. However, they may still need to take medications like benzodiazepines or others for co-occurring disorders. I am one of the many addicts out there who have to take medications for other co-occurring disorders. I have anxiety. I'm BPD. My doctor, my psychiatrist, doesn't think I'm schizophrenic, but I believe I'm schizoactive because I hear voices, I hallucinate visually and audio, and I have sleep problems. I have insomnia really bad. So I take Seroquel for sleep, Abilify or Aripiprazole for the voices and hallucinations, gabapentin for the anxiety, and anytime I have pain, it's either I deal with the pain or I take ibuprofen 800. And of course the Suboxone. And sumatriptan for headaches. I forgot that because I do get migraines and they are incredibly painful if I don't take my propranolol and sumatriptan for those. So there's always the chance that you have a co-occurring disorder and that you're going to need to take medication. Sorry, guys. There's always going to be that chance that you have a co-occurring disorder that you're going to need medications for, and some medications can be addictive. I mean, most medications can be addictive, but that is what the doctors work to prevent, is cross addiction. Transference of addiction is what it's called. Some of the people treated at Warrior's Heart, for instance, may plan to return home and continue using a different chemical such as alcohol in moderation. This is not recommended though, as it eventually leads back to their substance of choice. It's a transference of addiction. Eventually, if you decide to choose one substance over another, you're going to get so used to that substance that it's going to bring you back to the substance that you originally started on. Of course, this goes against everything we've ever heard about addiction and recovery. For almost 90 years, AA has ruled the recovery landscape, preaching a gospel of total abstinence. No weed, no drinking, no gambling, no porn, no sex, no nothing. Abstinence, just completely. Whatever you're addicted to, whatever you can become addicted to, is not allowed in your lifestyle when it comes to AA. More than 2 million AA members worldwide maintain sobriety through a 12-step program with an emphasis on surrendering to a higher power and acceptance that you are powerless in the face of your demons. I personally, you guys, could not work with 12 steps. I could not work with AA or NA. I did put a huge amount of effort into it, but for me, it just wasn't for me. Yet in recent years, the program has come under fire. Critics argued that the scientific evidence to back up the 12-step approach was inconclusive despite its ongoing popularity. In 2020, however, an influential Cochrane review declared that AA was in fact supported by research for 42% of the population. Nealon, who used AA to get sober decades ago, says she knows it works, just as clearly as she knows that it doesn't work for everyone. My case in point. Recovery is not one size fits all, with everyone fitting comfortably into a 12-step program, she acknowledges. Part of the issue with abstinence is that it leaves out problem drinkers who are unwilling or unable to give up booze entirely. Presented with a binary choice, keep drinking heavily or never have another drink ever again, they choose the former. That may be why only about 10% of problem drinkers seek help. Given that heavy alcohol use puts people at increased risks for disease and early death, the goal is to help more of the other 90% get control of their drinking, even if they can't fully quit. So my counselors are of the opinion that in excess, a little bit here, a little bit there, is fine, because even they have a beer here and there. But when it gets to the point where you are basing everything around that drink, around that shot, that one beer, that's when it starts to become problematic. And when you should start acknowledging that there's a problem and get the help that you need for that. So, drugs for drug problems. Medication-assisted treatment, like I said, MAT, which is the program I'm in, is a potent tool in the fight against addiction, yet it isn't used often enough, and it's looked down upon because, you're on a mind-altering substance. But if you're an addict and you get put on these substances, it's not to alter your mind, it's to ensure that you stay on the straight and narrow. With fewer than half of treatment programs offering drugs for opioid addiction, according to a study in the Journal of Addiction Medicine. Naltrexone, the drug that Lauren used to break free of the grip of heroin. I have a friend who was put on naltrexone for meth addiction. I've heard it be prescribed for meth addiction as well, but in this case, in Lauren's case, it's being prescribed for heroin addiction. Is actually a well-established medication that won FDA approval in the 80s to treat opioid addiction. In the early 90s, it was also approved for alcohol use disorder. So how does it work? naltrexone is an opioid antagonist, which means it blocks those receptors in the brain. It means it's impossible to get high while naltrexone is in your system. But we knew this already, right? Because I'm 7 years into my Suboxone treatment, and Suboxone acts the same way. The drug also curbs cravings for opioids, which may be the real key to why it's making a difference in the fight against addiction. It takes away the uncontrollable cravings that make sobriety so difficult and relapse so common, says Dr. Nelson. The first step in starting naltrexone treatment is to detox from the opioids, because if there are still drugs in their system, an addict will experience a rapid, much more extreme, and potentially dangerous form of withdrawal. I cannot express this enough, you guys. If you have naltrexone or Suboxone or naloxone or buprenorphine in your system, and or if you have opioids in your system and you do naltrexone or buprenorphine or naloxone, it will send you into the worst withdrawals that anyone has ever felt. I learned this the hard way. I had opiates in my system, and I did Suboxone, and it was the worst feeling. This is part of the reason why I never want to go back to heroin and to drugs in general, is because the withdrawals are just so horrible. Once the body is opiate free, there are a few ways to take naltrexone. First is via an FDA approved injection. 2015, the pharma company Alkermes won approval for Vivitrol, a long-acting injection of the drug. Vivitrol stays in the system for 28 days at a time, so it involves monthly trips to a doctor. According to the company's research, people who get Vivitrol are 1/17 as likely to relapse as those given a placebo. Another option is the naltrexone pellet. Made in a compounding pharmacy and implanted in the backside, generally by an alternative practitioner, the pellet keeps the opiate-blocking drug in the system for 3 to 6 months. According to Dr. Nelson, naltrexone has been nothing short of miraculous for his patients. If done correctly, it's virtually impossible to relapse, he says. He recommends that patients get the pellet implanted and replaced for the first 18 months. Excuse my neighbors, you guys. To 2 years of recovery, and then switch to the oral form of naltrexone, which they'll take for the rest of their lives. I do not want to be on a medication that I have to take the rest of my life. That's why I like Suboxone, because eventually I won't have to take it anymore. And that day will be great. I can't wait for that day. They talk about naltrexone a lot in this. I'm not really seeing Suboxone, but Suboxone does fall under the MAP program, and it does act similarly to naltrexone. So you can also take naltrexone pills and the Vivitrol shot to help you give up alcohol. But it actually seems to work better when the person continues to drink. This approach is known as the Sinclair method, named for the Stanford physician who discovered it in the 1970s. John David Sinclair found that taking naltrexone 1 hour before drinking chemically disrupts the body's reward system, taking away the desire for alcohol. So if you drink, it's kind of pointless. You don't really get that buzz that you would. So naltrexone takes it away. So you lose the desire to drink because you no longer get drunk off of the alcohol, because you're on naltrexone. It causes an extinction of the reward system, explains Dr. Nelson. The addict slowly cuts back on drinking as the reward of drinking is slowly unlearned. Remember Pavlov's dog, who stopped salivating after the food was no longer provided when the bell was rung? That phenomenon, known as as extinction is what's at work here. A study published in the Journal of Clinical Psychopharmacology on the Sinclair method found that a group that was given naltrexone before drinking drank significantly less than a placebo group. Stutters over here. Dr. Nelson himself was a skeptic before he started using this method on his patients. I thought it had to be a hoax, he says, but he has since seen it help hundreds of people. In his clinical experience, it works 90 to 95% of the time. One patient went from drinking 30 to 40 beers a day to being able to come home from a hard day at work and have a single beer, he says. Another went from being a hardcore alcoholic to having just the occasional glass of champagne at a wedding. It can take anywhere from a short time to a year and a half for problem drinkers to reduce their drinking to that of a social drinker. The only downside is that you need to take the pill before drinking for the rest of your life, or for as long as you choose to drink. There are other meds that help in the battle with the bottle. Common prescriptions such as the nerve pain drug gabapentin, because gabapentin gets to those GABA receptors and stuff, and it makes your nerves not as nervy, if you know what I mean. The anti-smoking drug Chantix and the seizure drug topiramate are being used off-label to dull cravings and help drinkers cut back. Another FDA-approved drug, Antabuse, which I have had personal experience with myself, disulfiram is an aversion therapy that chemically turns drinkers off of alcohol. I do believe that if you drink while you're on it, it makes you horribly sick. Drinking while taking Antabuse, yes, here it goes, yields miserable feelings, vomiting, chills, and crashing headaches. Makes it so it's not worth it to drink. The upside is that it works. The downside is that it works so well, making people so miserable that it's hard to stay on the drug. Antabuse is really, really intense. It is not a drug for the weak. So the last thing we're going to be going over is the cognitive therapy. Getting stickers all over myself. Anyway, even if a person goes the medication route, therapy is also critical. CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, focuses on changing both behavior and thought process, reframing the need to drink and the central role alcohol plays in a drinker's life. Many programs employ it to help people start new behaviors that change their brain and set them up for future success. Smart Recovery is an AA alternative program that emphasizes CBT. It's not like a 12-step where they ask you to rely on a higher power. They still do meetings, but they leave the God part out. Also key, getting help for any coexisting mental health issues, anxiety, depression, compulsive behaviors. They're all issues that need to be addressed by a medical professional, behavioral professional. At Warrior's Heart, patients are assigned 2 counselors, one to help treat their addiction and the other to help them work through mental health challenges such as PTSD and depression. The truth is, a lot of people who use drugs and alcohol do so because it has become a coping mechanism. And somewhere in their journey, they found if they drank, they could forget their problems, even just for a little while. Or they found that if they drank before a meeting at work, their coworkers wouldn't realize they had PTSD. The longer you use that coping mechanism, the more it's going to affect your brain chemistry, and the more you're going to have to depend on it, she adds. If people don't get help for those issues while at rehab, when they leave the program, the co-occurring disorder is going to raise its head, and you're going to have no willpower, and you're going to relapse. you can't control depression with willpower. In addition, many treatment programs incorporate mindfulness and wellness. From yoga of 12-step recovery classes and Tai Chi to emotional support animals and hypnotherapy, holistic approaches give addicts tools to help them cope when they're back in the real, often stressful world. Not everyone will respond to chimes and meditation, however. The best way to help someone recover from addiction, experts say, is to find an individual approach that suits the person. You should always group hop. If you don't like NA meetings, go from group to group to group. If you can't find that NA meetings or AA meetings aren't helpful, go to the next form of recovery. There's SMART, there's MAT, there's cognitive behavioral therapy. There's all sorts of stuff out there for addicts like myself to be able to go through and get the help that we need in many different ways. The best way to help someone recover from addiction, experts say, is to find an individual approach that suits the person. And that means never giving up. Dr. Nelson wants the world to know about the medication that is helping so many of his patients and that saved his stepdaughter while there was still time. Lauren now works at one of the rehab programs she attended herself. Dr. Nelson said she's treating her former self. And then we have this one. I'll go over this one real quick with you guys. Getting medications to patients. Several drugs already exist that can help fight some addictions, but there are still obstacles to widespread treatment. Although there are numerous medications to treat drug and alcohol addiction, better access and more research are still needed. The urgency of the current U.S. opioid crisis is causing more, often scarce federal dollars to be spent investigating drug addiction than alcoholism. At the same time, says Joshua D. Lee, an associate professor of population health at NYU School of Medicine, we are not using enough of the drugs and other resources that we already have. Generally, 2 mainstay drugs have been used in addition to naltrexone to treat opioid disorder. Methadone, which doesn't work for me, which has been prescribed for decades to treat heroin and other addictions, is delivered only in specialized addiction clinics operating under strict regulations that may require patients to show up for treatment 5 or 6 days a week. In some parts of the country, clinics are not easily accessible. Buprenorphine, naloxone buprenorphine, Suboxone, itself is a form of opioid, is another option. It can be prescribed and administered by physicians in their offices, but only by those who've undergone special training and had received a waiver from the FDA allowing them to prescribe. Most doctors have not. Naltrexone, not a controlled substance like the other two, has no special requirements for administering, but the formulation must often approved for treatment of opioid use disorder necessitates an injection once a month for as long as a patient is benefiting. Partly as a result of all these requirements, says Jennifer McNeely, an addiction medicine physician at NYU Langone, only 20% of those who have an opioid use disorder are receiving any treatment and less than 10% are being treated with meds. Perceptions matter too. The fact that alcohol is legal, widely used, and culturally accepted contributes to the low number of alcoholics seeking treatment. There's not the same social stigma associated with drinking as there is for drugs such as heroin and cocaine. By its very nature, says James Garbutt, MD, researcher at Bowles Center for Alcohol Studies at the University of North Carolina, addiction is an obstacle to seeking help. Substance abusers want to keep using. If the culture tells alcoholics their particular substance isn't so bad, that can be all the permission that an alcoholic needs to continue being an alcoholic. The same phenomenon can have a subtle impact on pharmaceutical companies, which feel less demand to develop new drugs to treat alcoholism than to treat opioid abuse. So alcohol is legal, so why should it be treated when someone has a problem from it? Experts agree that several policy changes need to be made to help curb the national addiction crisis. Special prescribing requirements, for example, should be eased, and clinics should be more widely accessible. We do have incredibly good medications, they just aren't getting to enough people, says Dr. McNeely. Finding more medications to treat opioid and alcohol abuse requires tolerance for trial and error. To be effective, says Dr. Garbutt, treatment for alcohol addiction requires working with patients on an ongoing basis and being open to treatment changes along the way. What we need, he says, is for doctors and patients to educate themselves about addiction, including paying attention to the problems of access. So, yes, I totally agree with that. Access should be more widely available. Access to clinics should be more widely available. Because they do make it very, very hard. I couldn't do methadone because I don't have a car. And I can't travel every day to the next town over because we don't have a methadone clinic here in my town. We have a Suboxone clinic. I got very lucky to have such a wonderful Suboxone doctor. But not everyone is so lucky. Not everyone benefits from Suboxone, which means they have to go up every day, 5-6 days a week, to Santa Fe to go get help from the methadone clinic up there. So, yes, clinics should definitely be more widely available. Next video, guys, we will be going over segment 1, which will be about anger in recovery. We have quite a bit to go through with this segment. This is one of my bigger segments. On my notes, segments 2 through 3 will be boredom and recovery and compulsive behaviors and how they tie in. And then segment 4, we will be going over depression and recovery. What I have for now, I am currently working on segment 5, which will be relationships during recovery, which is a very important issue to go over because relationships during recovery can be extremely stressful if not gone over. So, thank you so much for those of you who stick along for my video. This is just the beginning of this series, and I hope you guys benefit from it. I know the classes that I take and the things that I learn, I benefit from, so I'm going to hope and help that you guys benefit from it. So